Angels in America, a gay fantasia on national themes, is a two-part play by American playwright Tony Kushner. The work won numerous awards, including the Pulitzer Prize for Drama, the Tony Award for Best Play, and the Drama Desk Award for Outstanding Play. Part 1 of the play premiered in 1991, followed by Part 2 in 1992. Its Broadway opening was in 1993. Anthony Robert Kushner, born July 16, 1956, is an American author, playwright, and screenwriter. Lauded for his work on stage, he's most known for his seminal work Angels in America, which earned a Pulitzer Prize and a Tony Award. At the turn of the 21st century, he became known for his numerous film collaborations with Steven Spielberg. He received the National Medal of Arts from President Barack Obama in 2013. The play is a complex, often metaphorical, and at times symbolic examination of AIDS and homosexuality in America in the 1980s. Certain major and minor characters are supernatural beings, angels, or deceased persons' ghosts. The play contains multiple roles for several actors. Initially and primarily focusing on one gay and one straight couple in Manhattan, the plot has several additional storylines, some of which intersect occasionally. The two parts of the play, Millennium Approaches and Perestroika, may be presented separately. In 1994, playwright and professor of theater studies John M. Clum called the play a turning point in the history of gay drama, the history of American drama, and of American literary culture. In 2003, HBO adapted Angels in America into a 6-episode miniseries using the same title. In the Sunday, June 25, 2006, edition of The Record, in an article headlined, "An AIDS Anniversary, 25 Years in the Arts," Bill Ervolino listed the miniseries among the 12 best-filmed portrayals of AIDS to date. In 2017, the play received a much-acclaimed West End revival that won the Laurence Olivier Award for Best Revival in 2018. Later that year, the production transferred to Broadway, where it received 11 Tony Award nominations, the most ever received by a play at the time. It won 3 awards: Best Revival of a Play, Best Actor in a Leading Role in a Play, for Andrew Garfield, and Best Actor in a Featured Role in a Play, for Nathan Lane. Summary. Part 1. Millennium Approaches. Set in New York City, the play takes place between October 1985 and February 1986. The play begins at a funeral, where an elderly rabbi eulogizes the deceased woman's entire generation of immigrants who risked their lives to build a community in the United States. Soon after, the deceased's grandson, Louis Ironson, learns that his lover Prior Walter, the last member of an old-stock American family, has AIDS. As Prior's illness progresses, Louis becomes unable to cope, and he abandons Prior, who is given emotional support by their friend Belize, an ex-drag queen and hospital nurse. Belize separately also deals with Louis's self-castigating guilt and myriad excuses for leaving Prior. Joe Pitt, a Mormon Republican clerk in the same judge's office where Louis holds a word processing job, is offered a position in Washington, D.C. by his mentor, the McCarthyist lawyer and power broker Roy Cohn. Joe hesitates to accept due to his agoraphobic, Valium-addicted wife Harper, who refuses to relocate. Harper suspects that Joe does not love her in the same way she loves him, which is confirmed when Joe confesses his homosexuality. Harper retreats into drug-fueled escapist fantasies, including a dream where she crosses paths with Prior even though the two of them have never met in the real world. Torn by pressure from Roy and a burgeoning infatuation with Louis, Joe drunkenly comes out to his conservative mother Hannah, who reacts dismissively. Concerned for her son, she sells her house in Salt Lake City and travels to New York to help repair his marriage. Meanwhile, a drug-addled Harper has fled their apartment after a confrontation with Joe, wandering the streets of Brooklyn, believing she is in Antarctica, as Joe and Louis tentatively begin an affair. Meanwhile, Roy Cohn discovers that he has advanced AIDS and is dying. Defiantly refusing to publicly admit he is gay or has AIDS, Roy instead declares he has liver cancer. Facing disbarment for borrowing money from a client, Roy is determined to beat the case so he can die a lawyer in good standing, and he attempts to position Joe in the Justice Department for the prospective benefit of himself. When Joe refuses his offer, Roy flies into a rage and collapses in pain. As he awaits transport to the hospital, he is haunted by the ghost of Ethel Rosenberg, whom he prosecuted in her trial for espionage, and who was executed after Roy illegally lobbied the judge for the death penalty. Pryor begins to hear the voice of an angel telling him to prepare for her arrival, and receives visits from a pair of ghosts who claim to be his own ancestors, informing him that he is a divine prophet. Pryor does not know if these visitations are caused by an emotional breakdown or if they are real. At the end of part 1, the angel crashes through Pryor's bedroom ceiling and proclaims that the great work has begun. Part 2. Perestroika. At the funeral of a friend, a shaken Pryor relates his encounter with the angel to Belize. After revealing the presence of a mystical book underneath the tile in Pryor's kitchen, the angel reveals to him that heaven is a beautiful city that resembles San Francisco, and God, described as a great flaming Aleph, created the universe through copulation with his angels, who are all-knowing but unable to create or change on their own. God, bored with the angels, made mankind with the power to change and create. The progress of mankind on earth caused heaven to suffer earthquake-like tremors and physically deteriorate. Finally, on the day of the San Francisco earthquake in 1906, God abandoned heaven. The angel brings Pryor a message for mankind: stop moving, in the belief that if man ceases to progress, heaven will be restored. Belize believes that Pryor is projecting his own fears of abandonment into an elaborate hallucination, but Pryor suspects that his illness is the prophecy taking physical form, and that the only way the angel can force him to deliver her message is to die. Roy lands at the hospital in the care of Belize, where his condition rapidly declines. He manages to use his political clout to acquire a private stash of the experimental drug AZT, at the expense of withholding the drug from participants in a drug trial. Alone in the hospital, Cone finds himself increasingly isolated, with only Belize, who despises him, and the ghost of Ethel for company. Joe visits Roy, who is near death, and receives a final, paternal blessing from his mentor. However, when Joe confesses he has left Harper for a man, Roy rejects him in a violent reaction of fear and rage, ordering him to return to his wife and cover up his indiscretion. Pryor goes to a Mormon visitors center to research angels, where he meets Hannah, who is volunteering there and taking care of Harper, who has slowly returned to reality but is now deeply depressed. Harper and Pryor share a spark of recognition from their shared dream, and witness a vision of Joe and Lewis together. Pryor, with Belize in tow, attempts to confront Joe about Lewis, and Joe recognizes Belize as Roy's nurse. Lewis, regretting his actions, begins to withdraw from Joe and begs Pryor's forgiveness, which Pryor angrily refuses. Belize informs Lewis about Joe's connection with Roy, whom Lewis despises for his conservative politics and underhanded dealings. Lewis, as a result, researches Joe's legal history and confronts him over a series of hypocritical and homophobic decisions Joe himself wrote. The confrontation turns violent, and Joe punches Lewis in the face, ending their affair. Ethel Rosenberg watches Roy suffer and decline before delivering the final blow as he lies dying. He has been disbarred after all. Delirious, Roy seems to mistake Ethel for his mother, begging her to comfort him, and Ethel sings a Yiddish lullaby as Roy appears to pass away. However, with a sudden burst of energy he reveals that he has tricked her, viciously declaring that he has finally beaten her by making her sing. He then collapses and dies. After Roy's death, Belize forces Lewis to visit Roy's hospital room, where they steal his stash of AZT for Pryor. He asks Lewis to recite the Kaddish for Roy. Unseen by the living, Ethel guides Lewis through the prayer, symbolically forgiving Roy before she departs for the hereafter. After his confrontation with Joe, Pryor collapses from pneumonia while visiting the Mormon center and Hannah rushes him back to the hospital. Pryor tells her about his vision and is surprised when Hannah accepts this, based on her belief in angelic revelations within Latter-day Saint theology. At the hospital, the angel reappears enraged that Pryor rejected her message. Pryor, on Hannah's advice, wrestles the angel, who relents and opens a ladder into heaven. Pryor climbs into heaven and tells the other angels that he refuses to deliver their message, as without progress, humanity will perish, and begs them for more life, no matter how horrible the prospect might be. He returns to his hospital bed, where he awakens from his vision with his fever broken and his health beginning to recover. He makes amends with Lewis, but refuses to take him back. Meanwhile, Harper leaves Joe and departs New York for San Francisco. The play concludes in 1990. Pryor and Lewis are still separated, but Lewis, along with Belize, remain close in order to support and care for Pryor, and Hannah has found new perspective on her rigid beliefs, allowing her to accept her son as he is and forge a friendship with Pryor. Pryor, Lewis, Belize, and Hannah gather before the angel statue in Bethesda Fountain, discussing the fall of the Soviet Union and what the future holds. Pryor talks of the legend of the pool of Bethesda, where the sick were healed. Pryor delivers the play's final lines directly to the audience, affirming his intentions to live on and telling them that the great work shall continue. The play is written for 8 actors, each of whom plays 2 or more roles. Kushner's doubling, as indicated in the published script, requires several of the actors to play different genders. Main characters. Pryor Walter, a gay man with AIDS. Throughout the play, he experiences various heavenly visions. When the play begins, he is dating Louis Ironson. His best friend is Belize. Louis Ironson, Pryor's boyfriend, unable to deal with Pryor's disease, he ultimately abandons him. He meets Joe Pitt and later begins a relationship with him. Harper Pitt, an agoraphobic Mormon housewife with incessant Valium-induced hallucinations. After a revelation from Pryor, whom she meets when his heavenly vision and her hallucination cross paths, she discovers that her husband, Joe, is gay and struggles with it, considering it a betrayal of her marriage. Joe Pitt, Harper's husband and a deeply closeted gay Mormon, clerk at the U.S. Court of Appeals, Second Circuit, and friend of Roy Cohn. Joe eventually abandons his wife for a relationship with Louis. Throughout the play, he struggles with his sexual identity. Roy Cohn, a close-headed gay lawyer, based on real-life Roy Cohn. Just as in history, it is eventually revealed that he has contracted HIV and the disease has progressed to AIDS, which he insists is liver cancer to preserve his reputation. Hannah Pitt, Joe's mother. She moves to New York after her son drunkenly comes out to her on the phone. She arrives to find that Joe has abandoned his wife. Belize, a nurse and former drag queen, he is Pryor's ex-boyfriend and best friend. He later becomes Roy Cohn's nurse. The angel voice, a messenger from heaven who visits Pryor and tells him he is a prophet. Minor characters. Rabbi Isidore Chemowitz, an elderly Orthodox rabbi. He performs the funeral service for Louis's grandmother in Act 1 of Millennium, approaches and gives him advice on his situation with Pryor. Played by the actor playing Hannah. Mr. Lies, one of Harper's imaginary friends. A smooth-talking agent for the International Order of Travel Agents. Played by the actor playing Belize. Emily, a smart-mouthed nurse who attends to Pryor. Played by the actor playing the angel. Henry, Roy Cohn's doctor, who diagnoses him with AIDS. Played by the actor playing Hannah. Martin Heller, a publicity agent to the Reagan administration's Justice Department and Roy's toady. Played by the actor playing Harper. Ethel Rosenberg, the ghost of a woman executed for being a communist spy, based on the real-life Ethel Rosenberg. She visits Roy, whom she blames for her conviction and execution. Played by the actor playing Hannah. Pryor 1 and Pryor 2, the ghosts of 2 of Pryor Walter's ancestors. Pryor 1 was a gloomy Yorkshire farmer from the 13th century while Pryor 2 was a 17th century British aristocrat. They both arrived to herald the angel's arrival. Played by the actors playing Joe and Roy, respectively. The Mon in the Park, a gay man Louise encounters while cruising for sex in Central Park. Played by the actor playing Pryor. Sister Ella Chapter, Hannah's realtor friend who helps her sell her house. Played by the actor playing the angel. A homeless woman, a crazed homeless woman Hannah encounters when she arrives in New York. Played by the actor playing the angel. The Eskimo, an imaginary friend in Harper's Antarctic hallucination. Played by the actor playing Joe. Alexei Antediluvianovich Prolapsarianov, the world's oldest living Bolshevik, whose speech in the opening of Perestroika sets up the theme of whether the world should continue to move forward. Played by the actor playing Hannah. Mormon family, Amanaquin family in the diorama room of the Mormon Visitors Center where Hannah and Harper volunteer. The father resembles Joe, and later becomes him in Harper's delusions. He is played by the actor playing Joe. The mother comes to life in Harper's imagination and speaks to her. She is played by the actor playing the angel. The 2 sons, Caleb and Orrin, are voiced off stage by the actors playing Belize and the angel respectively. Angels in America received numerous awards, including the 1993 and 1994 Tony Awards for Best Play. The play's first part, Millennium Approaches, received the 1993 Pulitzer Prize for Drama. The play garnered much praise upon its release for its dialogue and exploration of social issues. Mr. Kushner has written the most thrilling American play in years, wrote the New York Times. A decade after the play's premiere, Metro Weekly labeled it one of the most important pieces of theater to come out of the late 20th century. By contrast, in an essay titled Angels in America, the cultural critic Lee Siegel wrote in the New Republic, Angels in America is a second-rate play written by a second-rate playwright who happens to be gay, and because he has written a play about being gay, and about AIDS, no one, and I mean no one, is going to call Angels in America the overwrought, coarse, posturing, formulaic mess that it is. 36 In his 1995 book Homos, literary critic and queer theorist Leo Bersani called Angels in America a muddled and pretentious play, whose enormous success is a sign, if we need still another one, of how ready and anxious America is to see and hear about gays provided we reassure America how familiar, how morally sincere, and, particularly in the case of Kushner's work, how innocuously full of significance we can be.